My relationship with this franchise was born from growing up in the 6th gen era of consoles. This meant the period where the Resident Evil 1 remake, Code Veronica, and Resident Evil 4 were the main stars of the franchise. I myself started with the 4th game, and as a kid, I didn't have the biggest concern for continuity, so I didn't mind starting later in the series. The same went with the Silent Hill games, where I played the demo of Silent Hill 4 The Room first, on one of those blue discs for the PS2. Over the years, I would eventually tackle the other titles, including the remake of 1, which I loved, and 0, which I thought was okay. But I never played the original Resident Evil 1, nor 2 or 3, and this was due to a decision to wait for the remakes once they were announced. But since playing the RE4 remake and touching upon other Resident Evil inspired games, I've decided to further nurture my relationship with the franchise and go back to the beginning to fill in the missing links to my experience overall, which meant I decided to go back to the game that started it all back in '96, Resident Evil 1. Now, I knew from the start that it would be archaic and dated compared to its sequels. It was the same effect I had when I revisited the first Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. I had good memories of grinding for the points and the challenges while hearing Superman for almost the entire game. But this game is different for me, because I have no nostalgic connection with it. My familiarity, however, did come from my experience with the remake of 1. So when I booted it up, I wasn't immediately lost. You see the cutscene in the intro, get chased by the dogs, you're in the main hall on the first floor, go to the dining room and encounter your first zombie, and at that point, you're more or less just left to your own devices until you start finding key items and solving puzzles. This was the series at its purest, no ridiculous fantasy-like viruses or Wesker with Dragon Ball Z-like movements, just a simple cover-up experiment gone wrong, in the middle of nowhere in a big giant mansion, and you and your squad just happen to be the guinea pigs in a giant death trap, full of zombies and mutated animals. Playing some of the other Resident Evil inspired games as well as the remake years ago reminded me that I was somewhat used to the tank controls and the fixed camera angles. I'll be honest here and say that they're not really my thing personally, since I generally come from more of an FPS background. Tank controls in general do take some time to get used to, and I don't really blame you if it becomes a deal breaker here. It's not for everyone. But once you get the hang of it, it's really not that bad. The cameras themselves are another tricky affair. The repositioning of the angles as you progress through a room can often confuse the player if they're not used to it. But as you keep revisiting these areas again and again, you'll naturally become attuned to what may be there and how to act accordingly. I've got to say, upon visiting this version of Resident Evil 1 for the first time, it's pretty impressive for '96, and it was something that came before Final Fantasy VII, one of my favourite games of all time. The PS2 will always be my boy when it comes to consoles, but the PS1 is its father, and it had some pretty impressive visuals and atmosphere in its horror games, especially when we're talking about the first Resident Evil. Look at the garden, the exhibition room, the laboratory, the dining room, the bar, even the main hall. The mansion is a sea of atmospheric horror that will swallow you whole if you let it. The longer you stay in the game, the more you will remember it. I've played a lot of horror games where their setting was pretty forgettable. The first Resident Evil isn't one of them, and the main reason why is because of how much you can interact with the place, on top of the changing presence of enemies as you progress. It's got a good number of smartly layered puzzles that will give you a moment of pause. The puzzles don't at all feel like a tacked on component to try and fit into the mansion, but instead, the puzzles are an extension of the mansion's grand design. It doesn't stick out, it blends in. This is how you implement puzzles into a horror game. The story is honestly not very good, but historically the series has never really been known for that anyways. The characters are what make up for it however, and this game is where all the cheese came from. Jill and Chris were the OG characters of the franchise, and they are both playable here, with big differences between them. Jill is the easier character. She's more skillful and can hold more inventory. With the Moonlight Sonata puzzle, she can play it off the bat with no issues. With Chris, however, he needs Rebecca to help him out, and even then he has to wait because she needs to practice. She also has access to lockpicks while Chris doesn't. Chris needs to find more keys to unlock more doors, or even desks. And the entire game is full of surprises like this, encouraging players to replay this over and over again, peeling all the hidden layers like an onion. This game has an incredible amount of depth with what it offers in spite of the fact that it's a very short game. Most players like me the first time around will spend hours figuring the game out, but the veterans of this game can beat it in under an hour. World record speedrunners have beaten this game in under 40 minutes. which goes to show how deceptively short this game actually is, but is lengthened due to the challenging enemies, the lack of a guided hand in telling you where to go, and of course the limited saves with the ink ribbons. You don't have the comforts of auto-saving or unlimited saving here. You use your ink ribbons and you better make sure it's worth the use, otherwise you may have to be prepared to lose lots of progress in the event that you screw up and run out of ink ribbons. In saying that though, because it's a short game, it's really not a big deal in the grand scheme of things if you do die. You gradually learn to draw a map of your own, which keys to pick up first, how you organize your inventory, which enemies to spare and kill, etc. It was the game to present all the core principles of what constitutes a survival horror game because it coined the term first, and not the bullshit that games like Amnesia: The Dark Descent, Outlast, and Alien Isolation had started, where your only choices are running and hiding. In this game you can run or fight, but the game doesn't punish you too much for either choice. The harder consequences stem from the execution of your choices, whether you wasted too much ammo, used a healing item when it wasn't necessary, or you didn't manipulate the pathfinding of the AI smartly enough. Something that sets the first game apart from the rest too is how much more grounded the enemy designs are in general compared to the later releases, which would become more abstract and monstrous to the point where it was just unbelievable. You have your typical zombies that are slow but are incredibly deadly up close, and then you have mutated dogs, snakes, spiders, and eventually reptilian-like creatures such as the hunters that can insta-kill you if they are given the opportunity, and the insectoid-like creatures in the laboratory. You also fight a pack of sharks, including a bigger, gigantic version of the snake and the spider. It gives off a more plausible feel regarding the situation. Of course, when the hunters come in, that's when it's apparent that whatever's going on within the mansion is only going to get worse, culminating in the reveal of the tyrant, the big baddie of them all, and something that was nearly unstoppable, unless you give it the bazooka or magnum treatment anyway. But this was the humble beginning of the series, before it really got out of control with its ideas for viruses and monster designs. Weapons were also pretty straightforward here. The pistol, the shotgun, the magnum, bazooka, the knife all had their place, and it was in your best interest to save up on whatever ammo you needed to continue onward, as well as making sure that you had enough space to fight back and still have key items in your inventory, on top of having space for 1 or 2 more slots. I really enjoyed my time with this game, and I'm really excited to give the original RE2 a spin since I loved the remake back in 2019. The remake is something I was already familiar with, but I will eventually revisit it again too. The original Resident Evil is the genesis point of this franchise. Its influence has cast a shadow over the entire genre of horror gaming that it has never been able to escape. And with the way Capcom has been going lately, the series has been in good health for quite a good while now. There's still more that I haven't seen in the original game, and it's something that I'll do in my own time since I've had a lot of fun and wouldn't mind revisiting it still. But my journey with the trilogy continues on with the second game. I would highly recommend that you give the original Resident Evil game a try. It started the whole series and still holds up really well for a PS1 game. And if you've already played a good number of PS1 inspired games that have come out recently, then this is a no-brainer that you owe to yourself at this point like I did. Thank you, Shinji Mikami. Thank you for giving us the world of survival horror. Thank you for watching.
No! Don't go! That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
Wait, what is that?